The first thing I'm going to do is weigh out my marigolds at the recommended percentage to weight of fiber. Wherever you get your dye materials, it'll usually say in the description, I know it does on my website, the recommended percentage to weight of fiber that you should dye your materials at. Now, going under that percentage, you're going to get a color, but it might not be as satisfying if you don't work within those percentages. And you can certainly go over. If you do go over, you might find that you'll have color left over in your pot, and you can additionally add pieces that will come out lighter tones. Now, marigolds are suggested to work with at 20% to 30% weight of fiber. So I'm going to weigh 30% to the weight of the goods that I have. Both my piles are 10 ounces, so I make note of that for future reference. And I times that 10 ounces by 30% to get 3 ounces. So I'm going to weigh 3 ounces out. So I have my smaller pot that was preheated and boiling. As soon as I took the cover off, it stopped to bubble and is now just under boiling point. That's where I want to be when I add my dye stuff to extract the color. Marigolds, not so much, but some colors, especially your reds, will spoil at higher temperatures. So keeping it just under that bubbling point is really important so that it doesn't oxidize and spoil the color. That's my general rule. Some dyes have recommended temperatures. Again, in that description or your research, you might see that. Particularly cochineal, a lot of people boil their cochineal. Just every material has got their own sensitivity. But I would rather, I'm going to add it, I would rather let my dye stuff sit for longer at a lower temperature, just so that I don't lose that color saturation potential. I'm going to let that sit for about an hour, just under boiling point. We have our marigolds only slightly moving around because we don't want that boiling, but still getting a little action on a medium heat. The reason we are extracting the color from the dye stuff, especially when it's a powder, is we don't want all of that stuff on our fabrics. It's a mess to clean up, and it can leave little spots on the fabric. Now I have some trivets over here. It's really helpful to have those around as you're moving these hot pots. Don't put them on your tabletop, that's for sure. And then I have a warm water pot of water that I need to bring up to temperature here. So I'm going to raise that all the way up. Now it's about halfway full because I have to factor in the amount of water that is in the smaller pot and how much fabric I'm going to add so it doesn't flow over on me. Now I just gauge that based on experience. I sort of know what I can handle in there. But you might find that once you add everything, you might have to like sieve some of it out. Just so that you don't go overboard. Now what I have to do is filter out the dye material from the dye bath. So I have over here colander, little strainer, I'm going to put on the surface here. And then my silkscreen mesh. You can use cheesecloth here, or again, a fine muslin, a washed muslin cloth, or an old t-shirt. Again, do great. So very slowly and carefully, I'm going to pour this in. I don't want it to splash in my face. And also, it can get a little bit clogged with the dye material. So you just want to let it be given time to go there, because you don't want it to go up over the side of the pot. and onto the table. Get all that in there. Whoop! I was trying to turn it for view's sake, and I got it all over myself. As long as it's not in my face. I'm burning. The majority of the liquid down first, and allow this to cool separately. And then once it's cool, I can wring out the best of the color that's left in there. It's too hot. I always do this. I do this when I'm making coffee in the morning. I just want to rush the process, and you don't have to. So I am going to set this aside and let it cool and get my fabric. I got my fabric that's been soaking, and I have my pot here with the thermometer in because I want to make sure I'm watching that temperature as it heats up. Wring out all the water. Nope. Okay, so that fiber is all wrung out. I'm gonna, again with the mordanting pots, I'm gonna open all these fibers up and try to get all the fabric in this pot at the same time. You might not care, you just do them one at a time, but there is a finite amount of color in this pot. So the first pieces that you drop in there, and depending on how they're mordanted, you'll definitely see variation. Okay. So this is not quite up to temperature yet, but that's okay. So I'm gonna keep stirring these guys and watch my temperature. You always want to keep it stirred like every 15 minutes so that you get an even all over color. You can already see a little piece of wool that there is a little bit of color, and you may notice that different tones are catching to the different pieces. That's what happens. Now, I stay at 185 because, again, that's my magic number. But generally speaking, silk is best dyed at 185, wool 195, and cellulose can handle a little bit higher at 200. Now, again, depending on the elevation, your boiling point is like 220. I don't like it to get that hot, so I'm gonna not go over like 195 when I'm doing my cellulose fibers. With time, you get the same results. So keep it over temperature at 185, especially since there's that silk in there. This wool, I'm not watching my yarns very well. Just as an example. So I don't need to be that cautious. When you are dyeing your skeins, make sure they are sectioned off safely so they don't unravel and get all tied up when they're in there. I'm gonna let it sit for at least an hour at that temperature and then let it cool in the bath water to sit longer. It's always gonna benefit from sitting overnight. Usually that also matches the time, the cool down time. So either or, like if you're doing this in the morning, just let it sit until it's cold or cool, and then you can remove the fibers.